In 2003, Mike Tyson officially filed for bankruptcy. At the time, he was around $30 million in debt, which is pretty wild when you realize he'd already earned over $300 million during his career. $300 million. Most people hear that number and immediately think, okay, if I had that kind of money, I'd never have financial problems again. Apparently not, because it turns out you can make an insane amount of money and still somehow end up broke. And honestly, Tyson's story raises a question that's been stuck in my head for a long time. Why are we all working so hard to make money? Seriously, people spend years grinding at jobs they hate, working overtime, starting side hustles, watching How I Made My First Million videos at 2 a.m., buying courses from some guy standing next to a rented Lamborghini, all because we believe more money will eventually solve our problems. But if someone can earn hundreds of millions of dollars and still lose it all, maybe the problem isn't money. Maybe it's the way we think about money. And that's becoming a bigger issue than ever. Not just in America, everywhere. We're living in a world where looking rich is often more important than actually being rich. A world where people finance cars they can't afford, use credit cards to buy things they don't need, and convince themselves that future them will somehow figure it out later. Future them is apparently a financial genius. Current them? Not so much. So before we talk about investing, saving, getting rich, or any of that stuff, I think we should start with a much simpler question. What exactly is money? Now, if you ask a textbook, it'll tell you money is a medium of exchange, which sounds smart and is also incredibly boring. A simpler way to think about it is this. Money is stored value. That's it. Let's say you spend $7 on a giant iced Starbucks drink. You're making a trade. You're saying, at this moment, this coffee is worth more to me than the $7 in my wallet. Whether that's actually true 5 minutes later is a completely different conversation. But that's how money works. Every time you spend money, you're exchanging it for something you believe has value. And once you look at money that way, a lot of things start making more sense. Because people love attaching all kinds of moral labels to money. You'll hear things like, rich people are greedy. Money changes people. Money is the root of all evil. But honestly, money is just a tool. Blaming money for people's behavior is like blaming a gym membership for someone's bad workout habits. The membership isn't the problem. The person is. Money doesn't magically make someone good, and it doesn't magically make someone bad. If anything, money tends to amplify who you already are. Give a generous person more money, and they'll probably help more people. Give a selfish person more money, and now you just have a wealthier, selfish person. Money didn't create the personality, it just put it on a bigger stage. And that's important because a lot of people spend their entire lives chasing money without ever stopping to ask what money actually represents. At its core, money represents value. That's why people are willing to hand it over. You don't pay Netflix because you enjoy watching your bank balance shrink. You pay because you believe the entertainment is worth the cost. You don't buy a new iPhone because Apple asked nicely. You buy it because you think it's worth the money. At least until next year's iPhone comes out and suddenly yours feels ancient. And that's really the key idea. Money follows value. The more value you create for other people, the more opportunities you usually have to earn money. Not always, not perfectly. But over the long run, that's generally how the game works. Which is why the biggest mistake most people make is obsessing over money itself. The paycheck, the salary, the number in the bank account. Meanwhile, they spend very little time thinking about the thing that actually creates money in the first place. Value. How do I become more useful? How do I solve bigger problems? How do I get better at what I do? Because the people who become financially successful usually aren't the ones staring at their bank accounts all day. They're the ones focused on becoming more valuable. And once you understand that, you stop seeing money as the goal and start seeing it as the result. You stop seeing money as the goal and start seeing it as the result. But here's where things get weird, because even after understanding that, a lot of people still end up struggling with money. Not because they don't make enough. Some of them make pretty good money. Some make more money than their parents ever did, and yet they're still stressed, still waiting for payday, still wondering where all their money went. Which brings us to a simple question. What's your relationship with money actually like? Because money is always moving. It comes in, it goes out. Nobody gets around that. You earn money, then you spend money. That's the game. Money comes into your life when you create value. Money leaves your life when you consume value. You work a job, you freelance, you run a business, you sell something. That's money coming in. Then rent shows up. Groceries show up. Gas. Insurance. Subscriptions you forgot existed. Suddenly money starts leaving. And honestly, personal finance gets way less mysterious when you realize it's basically one giant math problem. Money in, money out. That's it. In fact, almost every financial situation can be explained by one simple equation: production minus consumption. If you create more value than you consume, your wealth grows. If you consume more value than you create, eventually you're borrowing from your future. And that's where things start getting expensive. Now here's the crazy part. You'd think this would be obvious, but apparently not, because there are people making six figures who are still living paycheck to paycheck. And no, we're not talking about people barely scraping by. We're talking about people making really good money, the kind of money most people dream about. So what happened? Did they suddenly discover a new way to become poor? Kind of. The problem usually isn't income. The problem is spending. More specifically, lifestyle inflation. And lifestyle inflation is sneaky because it disguises itself as success. Let's say you get a raise. Great, you celebrate. You feel proud. Then your brain starts making suggestions. Maybe you deserve a nicer apartment. Maybe your 10-year-old car has served its purpose. Maybe it's finally time for the luxury gym membership. Maybe ordering DoorDash 3 times a week is now completely reasonable. After all, you're making more money now. You've earned it. And before you know it, your expenses have quietly grown right alongside your income. The raise disappears. Not because you lost it, because you spent it before you ever felt it. That's why some people get a raise and somehow remain exactly as broke as before, just with nicer stuff. And this happens at every income level. People making $50,000 do it. People making $100,000 do it. People making $250,000 do it. The numbers get bigger. The habits stay the same. That's why you'll occasionally hear stories about celebrities, athletes, and influencers going broke. From the outside, it looks ridiculous. How do you blow through millions of dollars? The answer is surprisingly simple. One expensive decision at a time. A bigger house, a nicer car, a private chef, a luxury vacation, then another one, and another one. Eventually, your lifestyle becomes a machine that eats money faster than you can make it. And trust me, I'm not judging, because I've done my own version of this. A few years ago, I finally got to a point where I could afford most of the things I wanted. Not private jet money, relax, but enough money where I didn't have to think too hard before buying something. And that turned out to be dangerous, because every time I wanted something, I bought it. New gadgets, new clothes, random stuff I absolutely convinced myself was necessary. At one point, I was even using credit cards to buy things I didn't really need. Not because they improved my life, but because they looked impressive. Which sounds incredibly stupid now. And honestly, it was. Looking back, I was spending money trying to impress people whose opinions I can't even remember today. Meanwhile, the people I actually cared about weren't impressed. They just thought I was being irresponsible. And they were probably right. That was one of my first real lessons about money. Because eventually I realized something. A lot of spending isn't about utility. It's about identity. It's about how we want people to see us. And that's exactly how people fall into something called the rat race. Now, when people hear rat race, they usually picture someone working a boring office job from 9 to 5. But I don't think that's the real definition. There's nothing wrong with working a normal job. The real rat race is when your entire life depends on your next paycheck showing up on time. When one missed paycheck would create a genuine crisis. When money hits your account and immediately disappears. Rent, car payment, credit card bill, student loans, insurance, boom, gone. The money barely had time to unpack its bags. And the more responsibilities you add, the heavier it gets. Marriage, kids, a mortgage, unexpected medical bills. Suddenly, every financial decision feels heavier than it used to. At that point, your job stops feeling like a choice. It starts feeling like life support. Because if the paycheck stops, everything else stops too. That's the psychological cost of living right on the edge. And the scary part, a lot of people don't even realize they're doing it. There's actually a funny psychological phenomenon called the ostrich effect, which is exactly what it sounds like. Imagine knowing you've spent way too much money over the weekend. You already know the damage is bad, but instead of checking your bank account, you avoid looking, because somehow not seeing the number feels better, like the financial equivalent of covering your eyes during a horror movie. You know the monster is still there, you're just choosing not to look at it. And I've definitely done this before. I think most people have. You know your bank account is hurting. You just don't want official confirmation. But the moment you finally look at the numbers, something interesting happens. You regain control. Because it's hard to solve a problem you're pretending doesn't exist. And that's why one of the simplest things you can do is track your spending. Not because budgeting is exciting, it's not. Nobody wakes up on a Saturday thinking, you know what sounds fun? Categorizing expenses. But awareness changes behavior. The moment you see where your money is actually going, you start noticing patterns. And some of those patterns can be pretty embarrassing. Then comes the next challenge. Actually sticking to a budget, which sounds simple, until your brain gets involved. Because human beings are terrible at thinking long-term. Psychologists call this hyperbolic discounting, a fancy term for something we all do. Choosing short-term pleasure over long-term benefits. Spending $200 on something fun feels amazing right now. Putting $200 into savings feels like absolutely nothing happened. One gives you dopamine, the other gives you a slightly larger number on a screen. Guess which one your brain prefers? And then there's social proof, one of the most powerful forces in modern life. Your friend buys a new car. Now you're thinking about a new car. Your coworker upgrades their apartment. Now your apartment feels smaller. Everyone in your group suddenly has the latest iPhone. Now your perfectly functional phone feels ancient. And then social media pours gasoline on the fire, because now you're not comparing yourself to 5 friends. You're comparing yourself to thousands of people. Every day, you open Instagram. A 22-year-old entrepreneur is making 6 figures a month. Someone else bought their mom a house. Another person is posting photos from a beach in Greece while claiming they work 2 hours a week. Meanwhile, you're sitting on your couch wondering if everyone got invited to a secret meeting about becoming rich except you. But here's the thing. You're seeing the highlight reel, not the full movie. You don't see the debt. You don't see the anxiety. You don't see the credit card balances. You don't see the sleepless nights. Nobody posts those. That's why one of the oldest financial traps in the world still exists. Keeping up with the Joneses. Except nowadays the Joneses don't live next door. The Joneses live on Instagram, and they're available 24 hours a day. Look, spending money isn't bad. Nice restaurants aren't bad. Travel isn't bad. Cool cars aren't bad. Buying things you enjoy isn't bad. The problem starts when you're spending money to create an image, because that's a game you can never win. There's always someone richer, always someone younger, always someone with a bigger house, a nicer car, or a better vacation. And if your goal is impressing strangers on the internet, no amount of money will ever feel like enough. That's the difference between controlling money and being controlled by it. The rat race isn't working hard. The rat race is working harder and harder to maintain a life you don't actually need. And that's a very different problem. Now, the good news is that you can get out of this trap. And contrary to what half the internet wants you to believe, you don't need some secret investing strategy. You don't need to start day trading. You don't need a course called How I Made $50,000 While Sleeping. You definitely don't need a guy renting a Lamborghini to explain economics to you. Most people don't have a money-making problem. They have a money awareness problem. The first step is painfully simple. Look at your money. Seriously, actually look at it. Open your banking app. Check your spending. See where it's going. I know that sounds obvious, but you'd be surprised how many people would rather watch a horror movie than check their account balance after a particularly expensive weekend. Because once you see the numbers, you lose the ability to lie to yourself. And that's uncomfortable. But it's also where progress starts. A lot of banking apps make this easier now. They'll categorize your spending automatically. Food, transportation, shopping, entertainment, subscriptions. The little financial vampires quietly draining your account every month. And once you start tracking things, something strange happens. You begin noticing patterns. Maybe you're spending way more on takeout than you thought. Maybe Amazon has somehow become a personality trait. Maybe your quick coffee runs are costing enough money to qualify as a small side hustle. Whatever it is, awareness changes behavior. You can't manage what you refuse to measure. And once you've figured out where your money is going, the next step is deciding where you actually want it to go. That's budgeting. And yes, I know, nobody likes that word. Budgeting sounds about as exciting as reading the terms and conditions before installing software. But budgeting isn't about restricting yourself. It's about making decisions before your impulses do. Because if you don't tell your money where to go, something else will. Usually advertising, or boredom, or TikTok. A budget is just a plan. Nothing more, nothing less. You're deciding ahead of time how much goes toward rent, food, entertainment, savings, travel, whatever matters to you. And the goal isn't perfection. The goal is spending intentionally instead of accidentally. Because that's really what financial freedom starts with. Not earning more. Being deliberate. Living below your means sounds incredibly boring, mostly because it is. Nobody's making viral TikToks about how they responsibly stayed within budget this month. But living below your means is one of the few financial ideas that works at almost every income level. You spend less than you earn. You keep the difference. The difference becomes options, and options become freedom. Now, before anyone starts dreaming about becoming the next Warren Buffett, there's something else that comes first: an emergency fund. And I know, emergency funds are the least exciting financial topic on earth. Nobody posts screenshots of their emergency fund on Instagram. Nobody brags about it at parties. Nobody says, "Bro, check this out, 6 months of living expenses." But when life inevitably punches you in the face, and trust me, eventually it will, an emergency fund is what keeps a problem from becoming a disaster. Your car breaks down, you lose your job, you get hit with a medical bill, your dog decides to eat something that definitely wasn't food. Life happens, and having a few months of expenses saved up creates something that's surprisingly rare these days. Peace of mind. The funny thing is, most people already know this. If you're watching this, there's a good chance none of this information is new. You probably know saving money is important. You probably know debt can be dangerous. You probably know having an emergency fund is smart. So why don't more people do it? Because knowing something and doing something are completely different skills. Most financial mistakes aren't caused by a lack of information. They're caused by human psychology. We already talked about hyperbolic discounting, choosing short-term pleasure over long-term rewards. And that's exactly why building wealth feels so difficult. The reward is delayed. You save money today, nothing happens. You invest money today, nothing happens. You make responsible decisions for 6 months, still nothing exciting happens. Meanwhile, buying something cool gives you instant gratification. Your brain loves instant gratification. It's basically the fast food of decision-making, which means good financial habits often feel boring in the moment, but incredibly rewarding later. Bad financial habits feel amazing in the moment, and painful later. That's the trade. That's always been the trade. And honestly, that's why personal finance is less about math and more about behavior. Most people aren't losing because they're bad at arithmetic, but there's another side we need to talk about. Because eventually, there's a limit to how much you can cut. You can only cancel so many subscriptions. You can only make coffee at home so many times. You can only optimize your spending so much. At some point, the bigger opportunity isn't spending less. It's creating more value. And that's where the conversation about earning money begins. A lot of personal finance advice focuses almost entirely on cutting expenses. And to be fair, that's important, especially if spending is the thing hurting you. But let's be honest, saving an extra $100 is nice. Earning an extra $1,000 is even nicer. Some of the wealthiest people in the world didn't become wealthy because they stopped buying coffee. They became wealthy because they got really good at creating value, at solving problems, at building skills, at becoming useful. And that's something a lot of people miss. Money follows value. Remember? We talked about that earlier. The market doesn't care how badly you want money. It cares about what you can offer. What problems can you solve? What skills do you have? What value can you create for other people? That's where income comes from. And unfortunately, that process takes time. A lot of time. People love overnight success stories. But most valuable skills take years to build. Knowledge takes time. Experience takes time. Relationships take time. Expertise takes time. You don't wake up one morning and suddenly become valuable. You earn it. One skill at a time, one project at a time, one mistake at a time. That's why if you're young, your main job probably isn't maximizing income right now. It's sharpening the axe, learning, practicing, building skills, making mistakes, getting better. Because trying to chop down a giant tree with a dull axe is exhausting. Sharpening the axe isn't nearly as exciting. But eventually, it changes everything. The better your skills become, the more value you can create. The more value you create, the more opportunities you have. And over time, that's what increases income. Not luck, not shortcuts, not miracle courses. Value. At the end of the day, money isn't the goal. It's a tool, a useful tool, an important tool, but still just a tool. What most people actually want isn't money. They want what money represents: freedom, security, choices, the ability to spend their time the way they want. And that's why the question isn't really, how do I get rich? The better question is, am I building a life where money works for me, or a life where I spend forever working for money? Because the answer to that question changes everything.